We spent here, I have to do that. Okay. We spent years together hiking around the hills and wandering around. And this was at the time I started to write a history column for the Fax newspaper. Some of you might remember the Fax. And that started my writing career really, and turned into a professional deal. So I have a lot of interest and love for Fairfax. So I'm going to share my screen now and go on with the show. We're calling it Fairfax History Patterns on the Land. And a big part of that is back when I worked for the Park Service, we got into looking at what was called cultural landscapes, which is how humans have altered the land in order to live on it and grow their food on it, and even do terrible things on it too. But it's always been of interest to me, the natural landscape and how we fit into it, and also just looking at patterns. And so we're gonna look at some of that. This isn't a real history lesson or anything. There's not a particular topic except for a few side ones, but we're just going to sort of look at how Fairfax came to be and some other little interesting parts of it. When you see this, let's see if I can, when you see this photo taken in the late 40s, you can see downtown up in the upper part and Bolinas Avenue heading towards you, and the Cascades down in the right. And you can see that we're tucked into a little valley in Fairfax. And in fact, we're up at the upper end of the Ross Valley. It's where this large drainage that goes into San Francisco Bay, it's where it ends at the mountains. And then you go over the hill, in our case, White's Hill, and out in Westburn, we do call that over the hill. And so Fairfax is kind of almost in a little box canyon at the end of this beautiful valley, the Ross Valley. And this view was taken in the 60s, looking at Fairfax in the foreground, one of those beautiful Ed Brady photos that are on display right now at the Marin History Museum's Boyd Gatehouse. But you look and you see the beautiful hills around that we all love so much. And if you can just imagine what this valley was like before we came along and started building roads and houses and cutting down trees and planting trees too. Just must have been a fantastically gorgeous place. And notice that it's not laid out, our towns, like a grid, like you'll see in so many other places of the country. There's a grid in San Rafael and here and there. But in order to get in and out of here, you had to wind up through these canyons and valleys on your way over the hill, so to speak. And one of the things that really formed Fairfax's shape, so to speak, is the coming of the railroad in the 1870s, which turned, as you'll see, from just a little dirt track that came through here into a more formalized linear landscape, with the railroad going through and roads taking off from it, and the downtown developing to face the railroad tracks. And you can see the tracks there that you see are what's now the Parkade, where so many of us go to park when we go to eat something or see a movie. Now, I'm going to use a lot of images from Google Earth looking straight down like this. And so I want to get you acquainted with what we're looking at, because it's not always so easy to understand. You know, we don't fly up here, so we don't all see this view, this satellite view. So I'm going to give you some tips on looking at this view of Fairfax for those of you who would like that. So we're looking down, and north is straight up, straight above, straight at the top of the picture, and downtown Fairfax is right in the center. And so just to give you a view from Google Maps, maybe that's a little easier, but this is the same view that we're looking at in the map, but I'm going to use these Google Earth views. I've added the most prominent creeks, Fairfax and San Anselmo creeks, and there are plenty of other little tributaries coming down into here. But the major waterways are what, of course, formed these valleys in ancient times, and the hills and the valleys, and this is how the drainage worked out, and we had to work around it. So on the Google Earth map, this will be Sir Francis Drake Boulevard going through. We all know that place. Here's Center Boulevard, which, as you'll see, had its origins not as a road. Here's Olima Road, which was the old road to Olima. And here's Bolinas Road, which is the road to Bolinas. I've always liked that old way of naming roads to be where they're heading. But we still have a few of those here in Marin County. So, so here we are. Now, what I'm going to do is go into this blank slate, which I wish I could fill it in, but I didn't have the time and the expertise to put all the terrain in here. But here are you see the creeks as we started out. And if you can just imagine this landscape being an empty valley with Coast Miwok living in it and passing through it, but no buildings and roads and this and that. And by the time settlers came here, there would have been some trails going through, not only these that I'm putting in here that are the likely routes of indigenous trails, but there would have been other routes going here and there, depending. But this is basically following the terrain up the Ross Valley towards White's Hill, which was a pass way before we started using it as a pass. And there would have been another trail heading over into the Lagunitas Canyon and probably up and over to Bolinas, similar to the Fairfax Bolinas Road. Well, after we started settling Marin County after 1850, these trails were developed into dirt roads, which were called county roads usually. This, what's now Sir Francis Drake was called the Olima Road or the San Rafael Olima Road, and the Bolinas Road was called the Bolinas Road or the Bolinas Fairfax Road. And but these were narrow, sometimes poorly maintained dirt roads. In 1875, the North Pacific Coast Railroad started operating, and this is where you started to formalize the transportation through the landscape. Notice how the old roads just sort of meander through. They're following the path of least resistance and going around hills and avoiding wet areas, whereas the railroad technology they could fill through marshes and cut through hills a little more easily than the energy they expended on building the roads here. And also a railroad needs to be relatively straight and it can't be too steep and all of this, whereas a wagon road can go up and down and around. So you notice it goes through in tangent, curve, tangent, and a much more efficient route. In fact, down towards San Anselmo and the Bush Tract and down Center Boulevard, there used to be big swamps down there. And it wasn't until the railroad came, I think, till they started filling in more of those swamps. And that's true up north, up around the Canyon Village. And when we're heading over to White Hill School, there were also big swamps up there that are no longer here. So from 1875 to 1941, we had a train going through. And so you come to the present day, and here are our major roads, like I showed you earlier, Sir Francis Drake and Center and all of that. And you'll see that Center Boulevard, I'll go back, Center Boulevard follows much of the rail route on the south part. And in the north part, Sir Francis Drake, when they abandoned the railroad many years later, they rerouted the road onto the old railroad tracks. So, so we're still kind of following the railroad, even though it's been gone for 80 years. So here we are. So this is just a little introduction to get you into the place we're talking about and the patterns of why Fairfax has that big curve in there? Well, it's a curve in the valley as it starts to peter out and come up towards White's Hill. So everybody used that curve, had to go around it, and we do today. Now at the California Room, about 6 years ago, we acquired with other county agencies a huge collection of historic survey maps of Marin County. And at the end, you'll see where you can find these online, and you can even download all these ones that I'm going to show you. We have 30,000 or more of these maps. And so I chose a number of interesting ones of the Fairfax area. This one is before 1873. I believe this is around 1869, 70. And you can see the ink drawn county road, which is now Sir Francis Drake heading up. And I hope you can see my cursor. Here is the road going up what's now Butterfield to Sleepy Hollow. And then, but otherwise we continue into what's now downtown Fairfax. There wasn't one then. This Owens place is the Fairfax home, Lord Fairfax and his family. And then we're heading north. And this old map shows where there were buildings or houses. And there weren't very many back then. And you see some familiar names if you're into Fairfax history. The Saez family had the Rancho Cañada de Herrera, and there are still some family members here. And Pacheco, Dubois, U.M. Gordon, who were early pioneers here. I like some of the pencil markings on there. Here you can see Rocky Hill. That hill might be the one that has been blasted down, and an oak stump. Looking at these old maps might not immediately be of great interest, but then you can find a number of little details, and they're great for a historian, not to mention a modern day surveyor, on tracking how they started to break up these parcels of land in these hilly areas. Here's another one, and this is also from pre-1873. And the line with the dot dash is what's now Sir Francis Drake going up over White's Hill, up at the upper left. And you can see some of the landowners again. Here's Senora Saez and the Short brothers, and Pacheco is still there. And this is a nice map because it shows the hills. Here's one made in 1868 by Henry McRae, doing a part of the rancho. Now you won't be able to see too much detail of this, but this is the entire map. And when you look at it online on our website, you'll be able to zoom in to incredible detail. I'm going to just show you this part that shows the Fairfax place. And that turned into, of course, what more recently people remember as the Marin Town and Country Club, and is now private property with a number of residences on it. But you can see how the property line follows the creek on the north and the east. And this is where Fairfax kind of got its start as far as with new settlers. And I want you to notice the lane heading into it from the county road. And that is Pastori Avenue now. So this is before there are any roads except the county road. And you do have the beginnings of one of our current day roads occurring back in the 1860s. And here's another view of the Fairfax place in 1884. And I show this to show the creek. Look at how wide they are depicting the creek. Now, that doesn't mean it was full of water that high, but that is how high the water could go. That's basically the banks of the creek as it appeared in 1884. And as you'll see on some other maps, this is the type of thing that could be really important documentation for creek restoration, or for at least understanding how drainage and such works in our communities, flooding issues, things like that. So we're going to look at a few subdivision maps. Fairfax was one of the early subdivided towns of Marin County because it had the railroad going through it. And by 1904, they had electrified the railroads and it became a commuter paradise, a beautiful place to live with plenty of home sites. But look at the patterns as they laid out this Fairfax Park tract in 1923. These were up in the hills. So you can't just go and lay down a grid and build a road straight up the hill. You had to contour around the hills. You had to develop steep lots of odd angles and sizes. But at the same time, you're needing to fulfill the need of being able to build a house and yet fit it into all of this and use straight lines. For the most part, a surveyor does not want to deal with curving lines that often. They're a real pain, and also for property lines. So you're taking a curving landscape and dividing it into straight lines. So you come up with a lot of odd lot angles. And I know that many of you who live in Fairfax run into that as a problem, maybe even sometimes, of figuring out where is the edge of my property or the corner, because it's such a strange shape. I just threw this one in because I'd never heard about it. This is the Monte Cristo tract. I've been up there. It's way up up the Bolinas Fairfax Road, almost getting to the Meadow Club. Up on your left, there's a subdivision of houses that goes back to 1912. And it kind of terraces up the hillside because the county road going along the bottom here, Fairfax Bolinas Road, is down below, and we're going up a hill as we head up this way. So, so this is like a terrace above the county road, and this is another one above that one. And yet here still, you see all the straight lines they're dividing up to make this subdivision. And Fairfax Manor, again, being built in a hilly country. And look at how small many of those lots are. In order to build anything substantial, a number of people had to buy more than one lot, 2, 3 lots, maybe even 4, to have a big enough yard and a nice enough place to live. Here's an early view that Bill Allen and I found, a hand-colored magic lantern slide, actually, that is the entrance to Fairfax Manor. This is the eastern entrance over towards Fairfax Lumber. You see they had that beautiful little awning, rustic log awning, and nicely laid out streets and a sign. And that subdivision map showed the funicular incline railroad that was a way to not only attract buyers of these lots, but as a way to get up to your house and somewhat of a tourist attraction. So I think you all know about the Fairfax funicular. And in ways, it's too bad it's not there anymore. But boy, just think of the tourist trap it would be today. So maybe we should be thankful. And Manor was a stop on the railroad, and now it's considered to be the end of the line for some of the bus routes. And here is the main entrance to Manor. Right up there, let's see, what is that, Manor Road that takes off there across the bridge? Excuse me if I don't get the name right, but this is back when it was still pretty rural. And lastly, I do love showing these maps, even though they're just a bunch of lines. This is just a really pretty map. And I really think that the patterns, it looks like somebody's funny hat, or however you want to interpret it, but the curving roads going around the hillsides and the cutting of it up into little tracks, and they gussied this up with some nice lettering. So that's a nice one to see. This one is interesting. This is a Northwestern Pacific Railroad map of Fairfax, done in the 20s. Actually, I think it was more like 1918. And it shows so much detail. If you're a railroad geek, you'll be interested in where the tracks went and this and that. But this is as we're going around that curve in the hills. And then look at all the stores that are depicted. And I believe they're just depicting what was there at the time. So there wasn't the building on the corner here. Was that called the Cascade building? I'm sorry if I'm forgetting that. But it's mostly stores. I wish it said what they were, but here's the bank, which is currently the parking lot of the Bank of America, which was moved over, and the school, where School Plaza is. There is a restaurant down here and a real estate office and the Fairfax Hotel. So look at this corner here at Bolinas Road. And here's a photo from the California room showing that, that corner. And notice that Croker and Company was one of the big real estate concerns in the Ross Valley. And they have a front and center real estate office. And Grosjean's grocery store is here on the far left. What I most like about this picture is look down Bolinas Avenue. That's the road to Bolinas, and look how it's all empty down there. No sleeping lady, no, remember the record store that Van Morrison's parents ran? You go in and there were these little old Irish people there. Those were some great times. But look at this. This really shows you the country feel of Fairfax back in the 20s, before they were really building it out. And I like to show this picture whenever I talk to Fairfax people. This I copied from Dr. Sneed. If people can raise their hand, I'd say, how many people remember Dr. Sneed? And there might be some of you who had his dentist work done on you. But he loaned me this, he let me and Bill Allen copy this picture. And this is the view from his office, Thomas I.J. Sneed. And he built that office. More recently, it's been the, it's a little cafe that has been some controversy over turning into a cannabis dispensary, maybe. You know the name of that little building, but just past Perry's Deli. But you're looking across the railroad tracks. See how they're raised up, and beyond you can see the Grosjean grocery store. By now is the Superior Market, and look up on the top. There are billboards. There are billboards showing Deer Park Villa with an arrow pointing up Bolinas Avenue. J. Garingelli. I don't know if you can see that very well, but so anyway, yeah, here's Dr. Sneed. He allowed me to take a nice portrait of him. The reason I didn't really want to go to him as a dentist was he still used the old band-driven drills. And I've had enough of that when I was a little kid. I had mentioned earlier about creeks, and another benefit of early surveys like this is the Cascades, and I zoom in on it, and they do show the banks of the creek as they were at that time, and these are very carefully surveyed. And what's interesting about these to me is how they laid out lots right up to the edge of the creek, even on the sharp bends there, which can be trouble when it comes down to high water and flooding and erosion. And so sometimes this shows a little bit of the folly of trying to develop too much. But I think that these early maps showing where the creeks are, here's another one in the Cascade subdivision, and look at how wide it would get out at times. Again, you'd rarely see it like this full of water, but that's basically where the creek banks are. So I think these are of interest to studying hydrology in the Fairfax area, certainly. And you might even find your building lot on here too. And even these small plats, which is one of the popular items for local surveyors to look at, will have sometimes a great amount of detail on the creek bank. So this is one of those places you see as you're driving along Sir Francis Drake and you're approaching the 7-Eleven towards White's Hill, because that was the Northwestern Pacific Railroad tracks, like I showed you before. And now Sir Francis Drake goes along there. And you go along that little portion there and you look right down at the creek, right at the edge of the road, and there are houses across the creek. And I know there have been erosion issues along this bank of the creek. So here is a 1927 survey showing exactly where it was. And I'll bet you anything that it's back here now, that it's eroded back at some point. But so if you're a landowner along a creek, you might come and look at our collection to see where the creek was in an early survey, if we have that survey. And another thing that you can find, which could be a little disconcerting, is that it wasn't uncommon to just fill in creeks and change the water flow. And you might not want to be living in a house that was built on the fill that is sitting in an old creek bed. So I think they made a lot of mistakes back in some of these subdivisions, and you can find clues to that in some of our old maps. Now I'm going to go into some of the roads that left town, because there are some interesting details on the maps that they made, on the surveys that they made. So this one is interesting to me, and also to Brian Crawford. I don't know if you're tuned in, Brian, but Brian Crawford wrote an excellent book on the Fairfax Bolinas Road. And so a lot of what I'm talking about in the next couple of minutes there'll be a much more detail in his book, and it's also well illustrated and mapped. But when they laid out the road to Bolinas, now Bolinas was an important port back in the day, and turning into a tourist area, they needed a good road. And the first road was surveyed out of San Rafael. This is in the late 1870s. But the road that made sense would have left Fairfax. So Hiram Austin, the county surveyor, did both. One from San Rafael through Ross and one through Fairfax. They didn't build the Fairfax route right away. They built the San Rafael one in 1878. And it wasn't until 1884 that the Fairfax route was built. But this is the map that we have. It's actually very big, barely fits into one of the larger flat file drawers. And you won't see the detail here, but again, you can see this online if you go find it. So I'm going to zoom into a couple of places. But you will see, let's see, I think on the next one, down here in the lower right, this is the San Rafael Road. And it goes up from Ross and through what's now Coffin Park, under where Phoenix Lake is, and up what's now called Shaver Grade, and over into Lagunitas Canyon. Down here, I'll show you more details of this. And then this is the Fairfax route. And this basically follows what we know today as the Fairfax Bolinas Road, except if you can see my cursor moving up here, it comes to this point and suddenly turns south. Well, this is now the Sky Oaks Road that takes you up into Lake Lagunitas and Bontempi, because that was the original stage road. And so now I'm going to go to the detail. Going across those flats at Sky Oaks, there was a lagoon, and it shows up in many of the old surveys. So those flat areas that is now part of the Meadow Club golf course, there was a lagoon up in that area. So the road came around and down what we call Bullfrog Gulch, and it joined the San Rafael Road. And I'm going to show you exactly where this is. Am I going to show you that next? No, what I'm going to show you is down here at the bottom, you see the Lagunitas Dairy. Well, this was dairy land up here. It was grassland. There were a couple of dairy ranches. There were 3 at least. And the Lagunitas Dairy was the biggest one, run by the Bontempi brothers, Bontempi. We're talking about a couple of different spellings of their name, which is where Bontempi got its name. And here's some pictures of the Lagunitas Dairy before it was all torn down and a dam was built here to create Bontempi Reservoir. But if you put these side by side, it would make a panorama looking up the valley that is now covered in the waters of Bontempi. By the way, looking at this one, I'm seeing redwoods up there. There's still some big first growth redwoods up on Pumpkin Ridge up there, in case you didn't know. Here we have Bontempi covering that whole area. So I'm going to do a little comparison here. Again, here's the Lagunitas Dairy down in the lower right, 2 roads coming together. This is the 1877 survey. This is Lagunitas Creek going off to the left, which takes you down into where Alpine Lake is now. Here's what this exact scene looks like today on Google Earth. Well, it's hard to picture where you are between these two, one thing is look at the road going off to the upper right. That is the dirt road down to the Bontempi parking lot. And you'll see that that is the old stage road coming down into the canyon, but everything else is gone because we have Bontempi Reservoir in the lower right and Alpine in the lower left that flooded a lot of that area. And then the last part that I'm going to look at here, this survey goes all the way over to Bolinas Lagoon, but is the part that shows Liberty's Dairy or the Liberty Ranch. At this time, it was a dairy ranch. And I want you to notice this Rancho line here. That was a line between two different Mexican land grants. And this comes into play in the next thing I'm going to talk about. They were going to build a dam right here that was going to flood way back. This is early in the 20th century. It was going to flood everything. But let's right now look at Liberty's Dairy, which turned into the Liberty's Resort. And when the Liberty family realized all these people were coming through on the stage road, they said, hey, why don't we do something for guests? We're about halfway through the trip. And so they started accepting guests, and it became a very popular roadhouse on the Fairfax Bolinas Road. This is all under Alpine Lake now. Now, this is the one I was going to show you. It's a little dim, so bear with me. We're going to zoom in on it. But if you can follow my cursor, we're coming up from Fairfax, up the Fairfax Bolinas Road. We're up on the ridges there. We come here to the turnoff to Sky Oaks and Bontempi and Lagunitas Lake. That's here. That's the old road. Now they're surveying a new road. And this is the road we currently travel. It goes up and around and up into the flats here. This is where the Meadow Club is. And then it continues up the hill. It's still like this, so maybe not quite as steep, to Azalea Hill. And here's where the Pine Mountain Truck Road takes off. And then down into the canyons, into Liberty Gulch. Well, notice here it takes a hairpin turn. I hope you can see all this, and goes down straight to Liberty Ranch. They built this road because there was going to be a big dam here, and it was going to flood this whole area where the old road was. So they needed a road around. And here is a little zooming in. The Meadow Club area was going to be inundated with water. That dam didn't happen. And Alpine Dam was eventually built, and it didn't flood quite as much. But when they built Alpine Dam, they had to abandon this part of the road going down to Liberty Ranch. So they continued from the hairpin, and that's what we drive today out to Alpine Dam. This old road is still there. I've heard it's being turned into a hiking trail, but it's a rare old piece of local history. Okay, another road out of town is White's Hill. This is Sir Francis Drake heading up over the hill. You see the brown bridge there. I think you mostly know that it's not the Brown Bridge because it's painted brown. It's named after Supervisor Hal Brown, who represented Fairfax for so long and had a hand in getting this bridge built in a very difficult spot for the road builders that had been sliding away ever since the road was built. So let's look at this. Back when I wrote for the Fax in the 80s, I made this map of all the different ways over White's Hill, and talk about patterns on the land. Going through time from a trail to, and the trail isn't depicted on this map. I didn't know the trail yet when I made this in 1984. There are at least 5 routes to get over there. It's a very steep hill. It's a very difficult place to get over. So it's hard enough to build a trail, even harder to build a dirt road, and even harder to build a highway. And then quite a challenge to build a railroad, which has to take a certain grade, can't go any steeper than something like a 7% grade. And so if you can follow my cursor, you can see here's the original railroad grade that went snaking up around and around over big trestles, and finally through a short tunnel up at the top, and then down into San Geronimo Valley. And that was bypassed in 1904 by the Bothene cutoff that went through the big tunnel over to Woodacre. But when Bill Allen and I, well, here, first, let's talk about that old trail. Here's an early sketch map, like a diseño of Cañada de San Geronimo, which is San Geronimo Valley. And here is Camino de San Rafael taking off. And it would have gone over White's Hill as a trail. Although this is interesting because over here above it, it says Portezuelo, which means a pass. And they don't say Portezuelo here. So it makes me wonder if they had another route, but the only one that made sense was that gap at White's Hill. And if you look at the modernization, in a sense, from 1858 of mapping, you get these plats of the land grants that were made after California became a state to confirm the land ownership. And this map only shows the edges of the rancho, but it does have interesting details as you look around those edges. And here is the Portezuelo San Geronimo. That's the gap over to San Geronimo, and it shows the road to Paper Mill. So that is White's Hill. That's our gap, and that is just a little bit of the trail being depicted there. This is interesting to me because up in the upper right is the Portezuelo Santa Margarita, and that was another gap that was not used for a road, but it does go up. Well, I suppose the fire road goes up there, which was more recently built, up over Loma Alta and over towards Lucas Valley Road, Big Rock, all of that. But this Portezuelo San Geronimo and the road to the paper mill was originally an indigenous trail used by the Coast Miwok, and then used by the early settlers and pioneers up until the mid 1860s. So you had to really work out how to get over there, but there was the obvious route. Now we have this 1850s map. Unfortunately, the Scotch tapers got to it maybe 50 years ago. And because this is a very simple map made by Alfred Escout, who was the county surveyor in the 1850s, showing what's called White's Valley at the time, San Geronimo Valley, and the road in yellow going over and down into Fairfax and San Rafael and San Anselmo. And it shows White's house. This is Lorenzo White, who was renting the farm there in the San Geronimo Valley. White's Potato House, White's Bridge, Charles Sice, which they spell S-I-C-E, in Fairfax, and Domingo, and so in Sice in San Anselmo. So I'm going to align this with a current day view. Roughly his line, it's not a super accurate one, but you can see how it had to wind around the hills and up over White's Hill and down into Fairfax and San Anselmo. And it was neat to see White's Potato House, because I'd heard that White and even Joseph Revere before him grew potatoes in the San Geronimo Valley, acres and acres of potatoes. And now we think we know where those potato fields were, which would be on the Flanders Ranch as you go over the hill there. But, oh, and here's a view of where White probably had his house. That's not his house, that's the Roy house. What was on more recently the golf course. This is San Geronimo Valley Drive now, but that was the old county road. And you're looking up the hill towards Nicasio, San Geronimo Hill there, Nicasio Hill. But this is a nice old view of the Roy house before it was moved, well, way before it was moved to Nicasio Valley. This is where White, somewhere around here that White lived. Well, anyway, looking at this detail of this, again, I have White's house, Potato House, and White's Bridge has always fascinated me. So let's move on to another map that Bill Allen and I found at the county back in the 80s. And this is the survey of putting the first road over White's Hill. And here is the surveyed road. Parts of it are still there. It's been replaced, as you'll see, going up and over the top of White's Hill and down into San Geronimo Valley. Well, the really neat thing about this survey is it shows the old trail going up and over this way. So we found that the trail went up the valley where Circle V was, and now Baywood Canyon, and straight up the canyon. And so we went to find it. And I put in a picture of Bill because he was my mentor and we got each other really going on doing local history. There he is examining one of the mines on White's Hill. And we had a great deal of fun finding a lot of those places. And then on the right, you see a 40s view of the Circle V Ranch owned by the Smith brothers. On the left, you have the White's Hill grade going up. And on the right, you can see the railroad grade coming around, the abandoned railroad grade. Well, that old trail went straight up this valley and then straight up this canyon. And it made a little hairpin up here. We found portions of it and found where White's Bridge would have been. You had to cross this fairly sharp drainage and have a small bridge. So that's one of the mysteries of the White's Bridge, but I think we solved. There's no sign of the bridge itself, but a pretty interesting place up there. Now the railroad went over White's Hill and then under later in the 1870s. You can hike up this railroad grade, as I mentioned, and find the places where those big trestles were. But they really did an engineering feat to build this, to design it, and it was built by Chinese labor. And it ended up with a tunnel at the top. It was on a grade, and it was wet in there. So sometimes the wheels of the locomotive would spin a bit because it was too wet trying to get up that final grade. You can't find the tunnel portals anymore. They've been covered by road construction, but you can find where the grade goes right in. And then one of the final configurations of the road over, because that first road that was built in 1865 was steep and narrow. It did get paved as part of the Sir Francis Drake Highway project in the late 1920s, but it just wasn't suitable. And it kept sliding away and it was too steep. So in 1938, the county built a new wide road. This is the one we drive today, which involved a great deal of cuts and fills to make it not so steep. And the old road, now we're from right near the top, is way up in the hills up here. You can still find it. And then on the other side, it's down below you. That's all private property. But this is where that brown bridge is here, because this kept sliding away, disappearing, and they kept adding more asphalt, and they added something 20 some feet of asphalt. And then here's a view heading up into the cut, and that cut was problems. Remember how it just used to always slide? Right after they built the road, it slid and closed the road for a whole year in the late 1930s, and they dug it out and it kept sliding, and finally, just what was it, about 20 years ago, they completely re-engineered that. So getting over White's Hill was not an easy task from the beginning to the end, and let's consider that it's going to hold pretty well from now on. Let's see. But that's getting over White's Hill. And yeah, all those squiggly lines, all the different ways to go. Okay, to close up, we're going to look at an aerial photo. We've been collecting aerial photos at the California Room's annex and the California Room itself. The main California Room also has some really great ones. This was taken in the 1920s by Thomas Kent, one of the Kent family, who was developing Hawthorne Hills. And he had this photograph taken probably 1927 or 28. And where you are, I'm going to show you, but this is Pastore. This is the sort of the southeast edge of Fairfax and the old Fairfax estate, etc. And you see the northwestern Pacific tracks coming straight up through and making a curve. And this is the county road, Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, joining it. And this is another of those interesting patterns that show up in usually created by different transportation paths of the ways people moved across the land and then ended up laying out streets, made these pie-shaped patterns and curves and this and that. So if you're going to look at this exact view today from Google Earth, it'll look like this. I'll go back and forth a bit. You know where you are? There's the good Earth. right in the center, just a little above center, and the shopping center there. And Center Boulevard is where the railroad tracks were. Okay, but and looking over to the right, you can see the roads are being laid out, but not very many houses yet. So we're going to go look a little closer at some of these. And this is the general view of kind of the area we're talking about. That train is waiting at the Pastore stop. So the Good Earth parking lot at the corner of Pastore and Center Boulevard is right here in this little triangle here. And part of the shopping center is over here. And this is the road into Marin Town and Country Center before they really started developing. And by the way, here's the marshes that I was talking about down in there. So that picture, by the way, was from the Perry family back when Bill Allen and I were working with them on some history of the Perrys and when he was the police chief and all. So here's a close-up of the Fairfax estate. Well, of course, this is after Fairfax. Pastore's had developed it into a restaurant, and then it turned into the Emporium Country Club. And this was probably the time it was the Emporium before it became Marin Town and Country. But you can see the swimming pool and the house. Here's a view of one of the people enjoying the swimming pool. But a very popular place for decades, for generations of Marin and San Francisco Bay people to come and spend summer days here at the resort. Here's what it looks like today, exact same scene. It's still there and under private ownership. Of course, I know there's been debate going on for decades about its future, but there you go, from a rural scene to more like the edge of the suburbs, an oasis on the edge of the suburbs. Let's just move over a little, and I'm going to take you from present to past. Here's where Carlos and Ponchos was for a long time. I don't think they're there anymore. Here's Good Earth in the upper right. Sir Francis Drake heading down this way. And let's go back. Here's how it looked almost 100 years ago. And they were just starting to build houses and turning from a rural valley dominated by farming and some vacation homes into a suburban town. And then finally, this upper part, this is where the pie shape is. This has changed quite a bit. And I wanted to first mention, this is Willow Avenue on the right, taking off up into that little valley there. This is what that valley looked like. There was a big vineyard up in there. I was at Grosjean, perhaps, who had that vineyard. And that is, of course, all houses now. But let's go back. Okay, so here's where the North Pacific coast, the Northwestern Pacific by this time, railroad came up and through, and it paralleled Sir Francis Drake into the county road into Fairfax. And the county road is way up above it. And you'll see when we go to the present day that they moved the road, in a sense. They didn't follow the tracks. They moved Center Boulevard over this way, so there was more area for parking lots. And this was the Friedmans, Max Friedman and his family, developing the shopping center. So they moved the roadway so that there was more room for building, etc. But yeah, a little slice of the past to the present. Well, that is the end of the talk, but I can take some questions. But one thing I wanted to point out in this last photo, it's a view from a hill up above the county road, and you can see the train platform and you can see Broadway. I could swear that back at Fairfax Park, there's a Ferris wheel. So maybe you Fairfax historians can tell me about the Ferris wheel back there. You can see the bank, and here is the corner of Bolinas Avenue. But all of this that you've seen is available at the Antique Kent California Room, both in our main facility at the Civic Center that has been there for so long under the able guidance of Carol Aquaviva. And then we have our map facility and overflow facility at Los Gamos over by Lucas Valley Road. Our website is marinlibrary.org, California-room. And to see the map collection online and download if you're interested, you can go to the website at the bottom, content DM marinlibrary.org, digital collections surveys, and you can find your way in it from the main website too. And you'll see all the maps, almost all the maps that I showed today. You can look at them in detail, and there are many more, and of course thousands around Marin County. And the California Room also has most of the photos that I showed. So it's a great resource. And I'm here because of them. They were generous enough to give me a part-time job, and I've been enjoying it very, very much. So, and I want to thank a few people and facilities and entities. And I especially want to remember Bill Allen. He was a big part of Fairfax until he died, I think in the early 2000s, and a good friend of mine and Mr. History. So I can take some questions if anybody's interested, I think either on chat or if somebody wants to raise their hand. Are you going to help facilitate that, Margaret?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Dewey, so much. You know, in the display we have currently at the Fairfax Library of photos, Bill Sager, the Sagers dropped off a box of photos, and some of those are incorporated. There was a photo I didn't put up that looked like two girls sitting on a Ferris wheel. And I thought, a Ferris wheel? Where is this? But you can see Fairfax in the background. So,
Well, I figure it's in
amazing.
Sager's book, and I didn't review the book, and so I'm probably just forgetting and might have seen it because that's a big part of history. Fun. I think that having a town that has where you can go and have some fun, that's always a good thing. Are there any questions in these? And I think you can raise your hand if you. Oh, thanks. Somebody wrote now Mana Bowls is where Dr. Sneed's office was. Oh, good. And Sharon says that the last Fairfax History Bulletin was about the dam, that ill-fated Tamalpais Dam, I guess. And it is true that the Fairfax Road book is excellent.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Where did the train go after White's Hill?
It goes over into the San Geronimo Valley, all the way through, down through
Where the mill was?
yeah,
that narrow valley?
The Samuel P. Taylor Park, where the paper mill was, out to Point Reyes Station, which was founded after the railroad came through, up to Mollis Bay, and then up to the redwood country. The reason it was built was to bring back redwood lumber from the Russian River area. And its terminus was at Sausalito, where there were ferries and barges that could take people and products over to San Francisco.
So that's what that under the trees, the broad base is where the tracks went.
Yes.
You can walk down that now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see Sharon Sagar is saying carousel and Ferris wheel were temporarily in town. Oh yeah, and Fairfax Lumber had a railroad spur. I see somebody asked, have you seen anything of Poncho's when it was a firehouse? And I haven't, but the Fairfax Historical Society is an excellent organization, and I'm sure that the folks there they'll know a lot more Fairfax history than me.
Who was Sam Taylor?
What about Sam Taylor?
Who was he?
He was an entrepreneur who came to California with the gold rush, and he had experience in making paper, and found that they had to ship all their paper to San Francisco. So in 1856, he built the first paper mill west of the Mississippi, out there, what's now Samuel P. Taylor State Park. So he turned into a paper entrepreneur and had offices in San Francisco and printed the newsprint. And I've always heard that they invented the square bottomed paper grocery bag there. I'm not sure if it's true, but yeah, Samuel Penfield Taylor.
Yeah, I remember going camping there as a brownie in the early 50s and looking up through the redwood trees to the sky when we were lying down there, little girls in our little sleeping bags.
And you know, they made paper. They didn't make paper out of wood. They used rags. So they imported all the rags from San Francisco, and so the place wasn't logged because of making paper. It was logged for, running furnaces and
Building houses.
yeah. Well, is there anything else? It's a little after 7 o'clock.
Well, thank you, Dewey, very much. And thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you, Dewey. It's
Okay,
wonderful.
Welcome. Hi, Jackie. Thank you.
Bye.
Visit the Fairfax Library to see a great display, and visit the California Room, and stay tuned to the California Room Library website for more upcoming presentations, which are in the works.
Thank you. Ciao.
I just want to say hi to Joan Weiner.
Hi, Meg. How you doing? It's great.
Hi, Carol.